home for you? Where were you born?
We were both born at a town of Lower Saxony, that's in the northeast part of Germany, called Helmstedt. It's near a much larger city of Brunswick or Braunschweig, and it's this side of Berlin, a couple hundred kilometers, I would say. It was the border. It was a town about Jamestown size, and it was the border city where the border was fortified, and there was a fence, and the between the British and the Russian zone.
Right.
Yeah, until '89.
And how long did you stay in Germany?
Well, I think it's very fortunate that our father, who was a trained and educated furniture designer, accepted a job in Grand Rapids, Michigan in 1927. That's the year Lindbergh went that way and we came this way. And I say it was fortunate because by being small boys, we were able to get all our schooling in public school and university and in this country, and we didn't have to join the Hitler Youth, which was mandatory.
Right. Did you, when were you born?
23.
23?
Yes. And I'm on the verge of having my 82nd birthday this week.
You look great.
Thank you.
And so you're a German immigrant, come over to the United States.
Citizen, of course, yeah.
And you do your public education here in the United States.
Jamestown, finished up in Oak Park, Illinois, which is a western suburb. And then he and I both went to Northwestern. I got 1 degree there, he got 2.
How long were you in Jamestown?
Until the spring of 1940.
And again, it was because of furniture?
Yeah, he was doing designing for companies, some of which don't exist anymore, like Empire Case Goods.
Right.
And at a company in Warren, Pennsylvania. I want to say Phoenix, but I'm not sure. But this was very much the furniture capital. And from here it moved to South Carolina, High Point, North Carolina. North Carolina. My brother says that's because of more favorable labor rates. But after that, furniture became a national thing because of freight rates. And it was being built everywhere, Chicago, LA, you name it, Kansas City.
So ultimately, you end up in the Army. How did that happen?
I started college in September of '41, and 3 months later was Pearl Harbor.
Let me give you, in case you need some water.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Sure. I decided to engage in a program called the Enlisted Reserve Corps, in which the Army said, you enlist with us and we'll keep you in college as long as we can, which amounted to a year. And then they called us up anyway.
Right.
But we have an enlisted reserve number instead of beginning with a 1, instead of a draftee reserve number beginning with a 3. It didn't really make any difference in the end.
Your book, A Few Who Made a Difference, entitled World War II Teams of the Military Intelligence Service, deals with this group of individuals who were part of this military intelligence. How did you get there? How did you find that as a niche?
Well, the Army found us. After basic training, which was actually, for me it was in the Air Corps, the predecessor for the Air Force. And after basic training, we were tested and interviewed, and they knew that I spoke German and could read and write it. Having studied it over here to learn to read and write it, I didn't learn to read and write it at home. They sent me to Princeton University for a crash course one semester long in German area and language. And then the higher ups came over from the intelligence camp in Camp Ritchie, Maryland, an hour from Baltimore. And they looked us over and said, your language is good enough, you're going with us. So we had intelligence training, which was something like 15 or 16 weeks long in Camp Ritchie, Maryland, now Fort Ritchie, but no longer the intelligence center, that's out near Tucson. And we had training there, and we learned the Camp Ritchie method of interrogation and so forth.
What is the Camp Ritchie technique?
The Camp Ritchie technique of interrogation, which abided very strictly by the Geneva Code, and is quite different from the newspaper accounts that people have been reading in the last few months about what's going on in Iraq. The method is two people in a room, the interrogator and the captive. No high-ranking officer standing around. The interrogator never expresses any surprise, like aha, to indicate to the prisoner that he said something important, but that just a general conversation about his unit, where it's stationed, whatever he wants to tell about it, its weaponry, is it up to strength, are the weapons up to strength, where's the company headquarters, even range so far as to ask the prisoner, well, were you on a furlough recently to your home? What were conditions like in that town? Was it all bombed out? Were the schools functioning? You know, it kept it very low key and never wrote a thing until the prisoner left the room. Then we had to write it all down.
Now, your principal job as part of this team was to come in after the front line. The American front line was moving through Germany or German-occupied areas.
Yeah.
Then what happened?
Well, the captured personnel, German personnel, would be put in a camp area for a day or so, and we had our pick of which ones we wanted to talk to. And I remember Major Adams of the intelligence service telling us, guys, they said, don't waste your time. If a guy just wants to give you the minimum name, rank, and serial number, take the next one. Because there are a lot of them that want to talk. They want the war to end. They think it's gone on too far and Germany's being destroyed by air raids and so forth. Just talk to those that are willing to talk and get the information I've just indicated we wanted. And then we wrote a written report which flowed backward to the division headquarters, to the G2 there, which was the military intelligence function. From there it might go to Corps, which is the next level, and it might go to Army Group, which was the top level. That general being Bradley. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Did you?
Omar Bradley.
Omar,
yeah.
As you were going your way through, and that's what the wonderful thing of this book, you do two nice things wonderfully. One is what's happening generally in the area, then you do the narrative.
Yeah, when my teammates talked me into doing this revision, have I covered that yet?
No, I'd like to know.
Oh, I covered it with Steve earlier.
Yeah, tell me how you did the book.
Well, it started when I decided to take my old yellow copies of Army orders and try to find the former members of 3 intelligence teams I had served on in succession during this year and a half. And you know, if you're alive and you have a listed phone, you're going to be on the internet. So I found about a dozen of them, and I drafted a short letter and sent it off to everybody with that name. And the most common one was Paul Sidon. There were, I think, 9 Paul Sidons in the USA. So I just sent out 9 letters, all the same. Dear Mr. Sidon, so forth, here's what I'm doing. Are you the one? And they'd call back. As soon as they got the letter, the right guy would call back. You know? Great. So we started having reunions in '98, which is, of course, 7 years ago. And we looked at each other's photo albums. Like I have a couple hundred photos, so you only see 90 of them here. And finally, about the second or third annual reunion, one of the guys would say, well, somebody's got to write this up. And they started to look at me, like this, And I said, Paul, don't look at me. You were a lawyer. You write better than I. He said, no, you write more for your work than I do for mine. So in 2002, I wrote this book. And then the next year, it's on my computer, one file per chapter. And the next year I went through 3 revisions. One of the revisions, the advice I had received was, please tell something about the war in general so people can relate to what you were doing and what was going on the East Front and in the Orient and down in Italy and so forth. And so I put that general description 2 or 3 pages long at a lot of the chapters, and then I went back to the narrative.
It's really well done, and it's easy to read there for somebody who wasn't there. As part of your interrogation process, you tell various stories here, and one of them was your surprise and your reaction of seeing a V1 go overhead.
Well, yes. When I was waiting in England to be assigned, we were all at a little town in the Cotswold Mountains called Broadway. We took the town over. And the people would say, what are these weird troops? We've never seen American troops like these guys. And they sent me to London for a week for what they called an order of battle school, in which they threw at us all the latest dope about the German army divisions and how they were manned and weaponed and so forth. And London was under V1 attack, buzz bombs. They drone overhead with a loud rumbling sound, and the minute that sound stopped, everybody went under the desk or the table because the bomb was coming down. Well, in the Ardennes campaign, known as the Battle of the Bulge in Belgium, in December of 44 and January 45, Germans were using the V1 and they were directing it to the port of Antwerp. You see, our army had destroyed all the ports. And we were out of gasoline because we didn't have a decent wharf to unload the stuff. It all came into Cherbourg in the Normandy Peninsula. It had to be trucked in 5-gallon cans all the way across France in what was called the Red Ball Express. So the war was stalled there along the German frontier, and there were 50-some divisions, 31 of which were U.S. divisions. And we were rebuilding, our army was rebuilding Antwerp and other ports, and these V1s were directed right to Antwerp, and they rumbled overhead where I was. And one of them was a dud. And, well, I don't know if that's properly described. One of them failed, and it plummeted to earth, and I knew what to do, get under the table. And it hit right in the middle of a prisoner of war compound where the German captives were held for our captives, German soldiers were held for 1 day before they were evacuated to safe areas further on west in Belgium and on into England and the U.S. And it landed right in this camp. And it dug a crater that, it was like 12 or 15 feet deep and 25 feet across, and would have wiped out a whole building. And afterwards, everybody stood up in the field, and not a single guy was scratched. And Major Adams said, get down there, run some interviews, see what they think of their super weapon now, which we did.
What'd they think?
Well, this was the weapon they thought might turn that and the jet plane, which the Germans developed, might turn the tide of the war, Hitler hoped. And of course, it didn't. And there weren't that many that failed in the air like that, fell short.
One of the things you talked about was the concern that some of the not German soldiers had American uniforms on and were sort of moving
Yes.
their way and moving around, and the technique that was required in order to identify them.
Yeah, there was a real, I want to call him flamboyant, German colonel named Otto Skorzeny, Skorzeny, I think.
Right.
And he had rescued Hitler, Mussolini in Italy. And they put him in charge of a battalion to be used for this counteroffensive in Belgium. And the battalion was made up of English-speaking German soldiers. Where'd they get all the uniforms? They got the uniforms in the captured trucks in the 2 months ago unfavorable airborne invasion of Arnhem, Belgium, where we lost a lot of equipment and men. They took these uniforms and put them on English-speaking Germans and sent them across the lines in our Jeeps and stuff like that. And then we set up countless checkpoints to capture and see if these guys knew the password and were familiar with English and American customs. Like they might know the password somehow or other, but they'd ask them, they say, well, who won the World Series last year? And the German, what World Series? What's the World Series? And you knew right away he was a fake. And they were tried as spies. Mm-hmm. It's okay to ride in a captured American vehicle, but if you could have a uniform on too, then you're a spy.
Then what would happen? Was there a trial?
Yeah, there was a trial described there that I attended with another person on December 31st, 1944. At that point, the Battle of the Bulge had been reversed, and we were gaining back the ground, and went to Liège, Belgium for a trial. It was a courts-martial in front of 6 or 7 or 8 colonels, and he was found guilty. And I spoke to him at a recess, and I said, what's happened with you? And he says, well, I'm a ballet dancer. I was in the Berlin Ballet Company, and we toured the world, so I learned English. And when the German army knew I learned English, they used me for this operation. And they had a whole battalion, which is like 4 companies of troops, maybe 800 men, in this Skorzeny battalion. And we think we caught 60–70% of them.
Right. In your course of your interrogations, were there some instances where you got information you just were surprised to get? And
oh, I think so, yeah. You would be surprised, I think, as I was, that he would tell you what farmhouse his company headquarters was in. Because we could train artillery right on that building, and demolish the company headquarters. That they would give that kind of detail. To say my company's only at 2/3 strength, or our machine guns and other heavy weapons are only at 3/4 strength, that's not surprising, but the surprising thing is that they would give locations like that.
And your information would go where?
Oh, well, let's see, it went to the G2 at Army, at Division Headquarters, and then if it was significant enough, it went up the chain to the top, which would be Corps and Army Group. And we also had to talk to every line crosser. And what's a line crosser? Well, in this camp of detainees, there'd be people in civilian clothes, farmers, whatever. And they had been forced to labor in Germany and in factories, etc. And when they sensed that the war was coming to a conclusion, they tried to get back to their homelands in Belgium or France or Netherlands even. And they'd cross the lines. And we had to talk to every line crosser. We didn't have a pick there. We talked to each one because secreted in that group of people were the German spies, double agents.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're involved in kind of a unique situation dealing with the Ford plant. Not only the background behind it, but ultimately in an ABC report.
Yeah. Is that an ABC report mentioned in the book?
Yep.
Well, what happened is this. Our team was not assigned to an infantry regiment. It was assigned to a special armored battalion, half-track vehicles. There'd be wheel on the front, half-track on the rear, and called the 526th Armored Infantry Battalion. And what the teams with that battalion did was to enter the cities that are about to be captured. The first big one in Germany was Cologne. And we grabbed all the military headquarters and political headquarters we could, scoured them for documents. There were never any people there, they'd all fled. But we found there were two places in Cologne that hadn't been bombed, right? One was the cathedral. They said, don't bomb the cathedral. That thing's been under construction since the Middle Ages, and it's irreplaceable. And the other thing they didn't bomb was the Ford Motor Company, which had a plant north of town on the river Rhine, West Bank. And years later, I worked for Ford. And every time I saw an executive from headquarters, I'd say, can you tell me something? How long have you been with the company? And why was our plant protected from air raids? And nobody ever told me. But one of the commentators on was it ABC?
ABC.
Got that story, or pieces of it, and he claimed that there were certain protected sites in Germany because the owners had pull in Washington.
Mm-hmm. Do you believe it?
Yeah, I've been inclined to believe it. Would you believe it as an attorney? Yeah. Of course, you hear a lot of things, but
well, it makes sense.
Yeah.
It makes sense. Now, who were actually the workers in the Ford plant when you were there at Cologne, when you got into Cologne?
Oh, they had a lot of, I want to call them foreign workers, but I don't mean Germans. They had Eastern Europeans, Bulgarians, and Turks and so forth. And they were very concerned about their future now that Germany was being captured and we'd hit the banks of the Rhine. Not yet crossed it, but gotten that far. And so there were about 1,500. Mm-hmm. And one of our top officers said, well, these guys are pretty concerned. Let's talk to them. Now, some of these interrogators knew more than English and German. Like one I knew that knew the Slavic tongues. And we'd line them up and address them in their native tongues, 2 or 3, Czech, Polish, whatever, and tell them that A, we were going to feed them and clothe them, and B, they would be returned to their homelands.
Did you ask them about anything else, how their operation was being run, who ran the operation? Did you get into that detail?
Of the Ford Motor Company?
Yeah.
I don't recall that. We also later on took the Krupp Works, which is the big steel company in Germany, at Essen in the Ruhr Valley, which feeds into the Rhine. And we learned a lot there too about how they ran it, what they made, the military vehicles they made and so forth.
When you were, again, moving your way behind the line, did you look for certain professions like scientists or judges, or that you wanted to know a little bit more about? Well,
there were other Army groups that were interested in the background of prisoners. The Army historical staff wanted to interview every general. These generals had stayed in captivity way after May 9th, 1945, because they hadn't yet been interviewed, debriefed, is the right word, right? And One of our guys named Henry Griesman, who is still alive on Team 97, Intelligence Team 97, stayed on. He was commissioned, and he worked in the recovery of German scientists from the eastern parts of Germany. These are the people who had been developing not only the flying missiles, but possibly working on nuclear energy and so forth. And he stayed on a year or two and did that work. Mm-hmm. So we were asked to look for that type of a background. But your ordinary run-of-the-mill prisoner wasn't going to be a scientist, it was going to be a farmer. Right. Or a guy that worked in a factory or a clerk or something like that. That'd be the ordinary run-up prisoner. And surprisingly, our Eisenhower's headquarters had some rather wise policies, and one of them was that the first prisoners to be released after May 9th were the farmers. Mm-hmm. Get them back to the farm. Start growing the crops. And the last ones to be released were the SS elite, SS divisional non-coms like sergeants and officers like lieutenants and so forth, because of their fierce adherence to the Nazi party. It was not a good idea to have these people released early so that they could get back into local governments that were being formed. So they were kept into the next year before they were released, and local governments were recreated all over Germany without them.
You were in Germany during VE Day.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Was there any, where you were, was there any specific celebration at that time?
Well, one half or so of the 526th Armored Infantry Battalion, to which my team was attached, was up in the Ruhr encirclement. Now, the Ruhr Valley feeds into the Rhine, and you got to remember, the Rhine flows north. It's not like our Mississippi. The Rhine flows north, and the various rivers like the Neckar and the Ruhr feed into it. And the Ruhr, which feeds into it pretty far north in Germany, is an industrial area with 40 big cities in it, like Dortmund and Essen and Duisburg and towns like that. And we were engaged in the U.S. Ninth Army had encircled that from the south, and the British had encircled it from the north, and that tied us up for the rest of the war, that encirclement. And so the I didn't get to Berlin at that point, or Vienna, or out to the Elbe River to meet the Russian troops or anything like that, because I was involved. So as soon as that war ended and those guys laid down their arms, we drove south again for reassignment. And for VE Day, I was on my way to a city on the west bank of the Rhine for reassignment. It was a quiet day, very quiet day.
What was the morale of the country generally? I mean, VE Day, the war ends. Did you get a sense of the feeling of the Germans generally? Were they relieved, or were they felt defeated?
Yes, there were mixed groups. I think the older folks, middle-aged and older folks, were relieved that the war was over, and that the fighting and the bombing had stopped, and maybe the food supply would be reinstituted and so forth, and the schools. The younger folks, and I mean, high school and college-age kids, they didn't know what to expect. They had never lived in a democracy, and they had no ideas about what Germany's future. Mm-hmm. If it pursued the democratic path, they had no idea what that was. Isn't that strange? Yeah. And today, I know Germans today that have come over and who were born, let's say, in the 50s, and they had their schooling in Germany, and they live in this country now, they got jobs and so forth. they don't learn about World War II in the German schools. So don't believe anything you hear that our schools are inferior to the German, Japanese schools, because they aren't even getting a proper history education. And that surprised me.
Did you have a sense of when the Nazi high officials, the Goerings, the Hesses, the Ribbentrops, when they were being arrested, did you have a sense where they were being sent?
No. Were they all sent to Nuremberg?
No, they went directly.
Bad Mondo, didn't they?
Yeah, they went to Luxembourg.
Yeah, Luxembourg I know very well.
And we had an individual similar to you, but his role was to interrogate the top Nazis officials as they were being arrested one by one by one. They were sent to Mondorf Palace in Luxembourg.
I'll be darned.
That was the holding tank.
Yeah.
And then they would be interviewed there surreptitiously. They sort of integrated and were kind of Geneva American Red Cross helpers of these guys. And they talk. So that's how they got a lot of information for the Nuremberg trial.
No, I'm not into the intelligence service at that exact level. As a matter of fact, I recently reviewed a book for a publishing company of a colonel who had a writer working with him. So I guess he told the book, and the writer wrote it all down. And he was a colonel in the military intelligence service at the highest level, and his accounts of the war and his photographs are completely different from mine. You know, there's pictures of him riding around with Omar Bradley and Eisenhower and, you know, things like that, which I don't have.
Did you ever see these guys?
I saw Eisenhower. There's a picture in the book there. There are 90 photos in the book. Near the end, there's a picture of a military ceremony at Heidelberg. And that became the headquarters for the 7th U.S. Army. And he was there that day, and I had a camera, of course, and took the picture.
How did you feel about the Germans? Here, I mean, you're a German.
Yeah.
You come to America, you're fighting basically your fellow man. What was your feelings?
Yeah, that's a sort of a mixed bag today. Try to think back of what our emotions were in those days. I think our principal emotion as a soldier was that we wished the war would end, but we didn't know when it was going to end. There wasn't a date in the future engraved in our minds or anything like that. And every week you'd say, how much longer is this thing going to go on, you know? So that was our principal emotion, was uncertainty about the future. I felt that some of the Germans that we met and interrogated were real interested in the welfare of Germany and would do anything for their country, but that others were strictly Nazi Party people. And I didn't have much sympathy for them.
Was your family still there? Were there any families still in Germany?
Yeah, there was. Let's see, my dad had one sibling, a sister, and her 3 kids were there with offspring. And my mother had 3 siblings, and I believe at that point in time only one of those was and still remained in Germany. Mm-hmm. So they had family and offspring. And during the combat in the Ruhr encirclement, I visited some members of, I visited a family of my dad's sister, and took another GI, went down to the little town south of Essen, asked where the mayor was. They directed me, said, I want Helmut Hein's address. That was my first cousin's name. They told me, and I went to the house. I rapped on the door, and this female sticks her head out of the second floor, and she said, "Was wollen Sie?" What do you want? And here I am in an American uniform and helmet, the carbine over my shoulder and everything. And I said, Ich bin Karl ab aus Chicago. And suddenly the doors flung open and all these people came out.
Really?
Yeah, she was there. Her sister was there. Her brother was there, injured and out, discharged from the German army. And their offspring were there. And they invited me and my buddy. And as a matter of fact, we went back a second time to visit there. And that was during combat. There was still rifle fire just across the Roar River from where they lived. So we had to be careful. Driving around in a Jeep, you know. You'd make sure the top was down and so forth.
Well, in one sense, you were violating some of the fraternization rules.
Yeah, and do you know, I don't know anybody that was ever charged with fraternization. It was going on all the time. And it shouldn't, I shouldn't have been, and you know, when Helmut Hein, my cousin who was injured and disabled, said, let's go over to see your dad's favorite uncle who lives up the road. And he said, I'll walk forward and you stay 100 feet behind, or whatever, 30 meters, and follow me. Because we weren't supposed to be walking together.
Right. What question should I be asking you now? What have I missed?
Well, you've been pretty thorough.
This is a pretty amazing story.
Is it really?
Yeah.
Well, I think the question I'm asked most frequently when I give presentations of the book at veterans groups around the Chicago area or in the schools is, well, how does this interrogations differ, if at all, from the method that's being used today? And I addressed that earlier, and I said we were strictly adhering to the Geneva Conference, and prisoner needs only give you name, rank, and serial number, and you may not mistreat them or withhold food from them. You may not put them to work in one of your defense industries in England or the USA, but they did go work on farms. A lot of farmers in this country subsided with German prisoners as their work crew because their regular crews were the army, our army. I'm asked that question most often, is how we were treated, how we treated the prisoners, and that's my answer to it.
So if they were recalcitrant in any ways, you just let them go or moved on to the next person?
Move to the next guy because there were so many.
Yeah.
Yeah. We didn't think one guy was exclusively in charge of certain information. There were some German prisoners that were very amenable and friendly, and one of them was a young man. He said, I wanted to get back into military government in Germany as soon as I can, and we saw to it that when one of the first German towns was captured around Aachen, that he was assigned to the military government unit there to be a member of the German government in that town. And another one was a very professional soldier who hated the Nazis. He said, I'll go back to Germany for you. What do you want me to do? And I dropped him off at an infantry division headquarters, and he crossed the lines. And when we entered and captured Cologne, he reported to us, told us what he'd found out. To this day, you don't know whether he was authentically with us or whether he was still secretly with the Germans. How would you know?
You saw Marlene Dietrich and Mickey Rooney at the U.S. Social. Tell me about that.
I was assigned during this lull in the fighting and that culminated in the Battle of the Bulge, or the lull that occurred because everybody ran out of gasoline. I was assigned to the 1st Army Interrogation Center, which is near the German border, by Aachen and Liège. And we retreated when the battle struck. And we went we went west 30 miles, 30 kilometers, confused, one or the other, to a citadel, a fortress on the Meuse River at a town south of Liège. This was called Huy, H-U-Y, the citadel of Huy. And nearby, there were a USO show came with those two people in it. Yeah.
Marlene Dietrich, if I'm right, she was German, right?
Oh, she was German, yeah. They're very highly thought of in Germany today. Yes.
Helmut, what question should I ask?
I found it interesting that they obtained information that the Germans were building up military in northwest Germany, which became the Battle of the Bulge. And they passed that information on up, but it was not accepted.
No.
And so that the people higher up were surprised of the German resistance. This is the Battle of the Bulge.
That's true.
They were getting a lot of vibes about it, and nobody did it.
Yeah, they didn't believe that the Germans could mass a force of 1 million troops and 1,000 tanks. Well, they didn't quite reach those numbers, but that's what Hitler's goal was. And so when that battle struck on December 16th, 1944, and I was on the highway. I had just delivered a very key prisoner to Army Group headquarters. And I was on my way back, and I heard cannon fire on the road leading north out of Bastogne. And I got back to the interrogation center, and I said, something is wrong. I heard cannon fire. I said, you heard the right thing. They have attacked. And now everybody believes that there was going to be an attack. So immediately, the Ninth Army was ordered to send armored forces southward out of Holland, and Patton, Third Army, was ordered to send them northward out of France and nip off this penetration, which was a very decent penetration of Germany, of Belgium, in the Ardennes region, the very region where the Germans had attacked in 1940. It's mountainous, it's hilly, it's sort of like this area, a lot of woods, hills.
Were you discouraged by the fact that you had this intelligence, it did work its way up, and somehow nobody believed it, or took notice of it?
We were vindicated, of course. Yeah. I remember a few years ago, Henry Griesman, whom I've referred to before, who stayed on in the German science probe, he wrote an article to a magazine about that they had not believed us, and they had proven to be wrong, and they immediately had to have a reactionary plan to stop this invasion. Well, the Germans got right in there, I'll tell you that.
Well, did we lose more in the Ardennes Battle of Bulge than we did in Normandy?
Yes, sir. We did quite a few more. Something like 80,000 casualties. Now that's made up of killed, wounded, and captured.
Right.
And at this little town where the First Army Interrogation Center had been between Aachen and Liège, this town was Henri-Chapelle. It was almost exactly on the border of Germany and Belgium. And north of there, there's a massive cemetery. There's another one down in Luxembourg where these people, where Patton is buried, where these people from that campaign who were killed lie buried. Yeah. And the First Army headquarters had penetrated as far as a resort town also in that part of Germany called Spa, S-P-A. We all know what a spa is. and they occupied a bunch of hotels, and that attack came so fast that they didn't have time to clear the intelligence stuff out of the hotel. They burnt them to the ground.
Totally unrelated. What's your remembrances of Jamestown, New York?
Well, they're pretty happy ones. My dad designed in Grand Rapids for 4 or 5 years, and then with one side trip to Cincinnati where he worked for Baldwin Piano for a while, which still produces down there. And then he was offered a job in Jamestown. And my remembrances are that it had 2 big minorities groups, if you want to call them that, Swedes and Italians. And the Swedish were very strong. They had a newspaper, they had Swedish church services, they taught it in the high school. The high school had 2 cheers in Swedish, you know.
Rooten Scrutin.
Yeah, and we had a good time here. We had a good time. My folks never owned any property, they just rented, but we had some nice houses and they'd be sold out from under us and we'd have to move again. But we made a lot of good friends.
How long were you in Jamestown?
From about 31 or 31 to the beginning of 1940. And it was furniture, and it was depression. And what was it, 10 cents an hour they were paying?
All right. What's your family consist of? Your mother, dad, Helmut, anybody else?
That was it.
That was it?
That was the family. Father died in 40. After we moved to Oak Park, Illinois, he died later that year. And my mother converted herself into a bookkeeper in the old pre-computer days and became a bookkeeper for Northwest Mutual Life Insurance Company. And Helmut and I went to college after we finished high school in Oak Park. Went to Northwestern University. Yeah.
Questions?
Yes, I thought it was interesting that shortly after they went into Germany, they ran polls of hundreds of Germans to ask them about the future, what they thought of the future.
Yeah.
The Germany recovery. Questions also like, would you prefer to be occupied temporarily by the English or the French or the Russians? Of course, you know what the answer is.
Yeah.
But to ask the people who were citizens what they thought about the future, I thought it very good-minded.
Yeah, well, that's the point where I said that the younger folks had no idea how to answer that question because they didn't know what living under a democratic regime would be like. Yeah.
I think the fact that they even asked the question is amazing.
Yeah, well, we were working for military government who didn't have as strong language capabilities as we did. Steve has a
I
question.
got a question about, I read where there was something like 15 field marshals at the height of the war.
Oh, there were.
At the end of the war, there were 5. Now, obviously, because of failures and because of the way the war was going, I assumed that Hitler demoted these people.
Yeah.
Brauchitz, I think, and maybe Guderian, I'm not sure. But
Well, there was a
Paulson was another one.
von Rundstedt.
Yeah. Now, do you have a comment to make on that? I mean,
No, I can't really. I know that von Rundstedt came, who was in charge, very high up in the North African campaign. But Hitler pulled him out of the West Front. And he came from a little town near Ulm, Germany, which is on the Danube, where I had my final occupation duty with Team 499. And that town buried him a few years ago. He did live a long time. Yeah, very long time.
I also read where on the Russian, well, it was in Stalingrad, when I think was it
Yeah.
the German 6th or 9th Army, was it, which one?
I don't know.
6.
I don't recall.
6.
Yeah.
280,000 German troops, just before Stalingrad, the Russians took over. They surrounded 280,000 German troops and marched them to Siberia. 22,000 left. A week later, the 9th German Army in the Hürtgen Forest, which
Yeah.
is near Berlin, right?
Yeah, yes. No, it's near Aachen.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, they were decimated by the Russians.
Mm-hmm.
And it just, there's 500,000 men just.
One of the cousins I mentioned a while back, whom I visited in the Ruhr Valley, you know, when they all rushed out of the house to greet me, her husband was in the group that never came back.
Wow.
And they had 2 daughters, both living now, but he didn't make it back, and they never heard why. And years later, she married a guy from the States, and they lived in Vermont. And we used to drive east and stop in Jamestown and go over to Vermont and visit them with the kids and our kids, and it was a fun thing until she died of cancer. Yes, but her husband never came back, and he was in that large percentage that you just spoke of. Yeah.
This is terrific. Wow. Thank you for sharing all
Oh,
of your
yeah.
stories.
Well, it's my pleasure. Thank you. I wasn't expecting this to happen, and I don't have my notes with me, but I've given this talk a dozen times, so it's pretty well in my brain.
Yeah, clearly you have command of this subject.
And I even have a short version of the talk. Ordinarily, it's 45 minutes long, and but I have a short version some of the school teachers like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing all that. This is terrific.
My pleasure.
Welcome to the Jackson Center.
My pleasure to be here. Thank you.